Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our weekly ATK meeting. And so today on the plan, we're going to talk about Vue.js. And I discussed this briefly with Alain some time ago. And we actually want. So, okay, here's the situation. We started by using semantic UI. That was approximately 2 years ago when I started ATK. And since then, we switched to Fomantic. And Fomantic announced that they're going to release version 3.0. But within this version, they said they would like to drop support for jQuery. And you could use React, you could use something else. Something needs to be there because if you have form, you need to have a widget that kind of submits the form and sends it off. Maybe they can get rid of all the JavaScript, so the semantic will turn into a pure CSS framework. But then drop-downs will not work, switches will not work, a lot of functionality will not work. So I'm thinking that they will pick some, something, but I'm hoping it will be Vue.js, because Vue.js is really, really nice.
Yeah, and it works well with the ATK also.
Yes, and we thought about this for, ourselves. And we would like to add integration in ATK UI, which fundamentally allow for easier integration with Vue.js components, including some which might be native to ATK. So, for example, we might have a form that doesn't use semantic UI's JavaScript, but instead it uses Vue.js component. And also we will be working on some add-ons which also would like to use Vue.js. And because there are so many internal and external components that would benefit from Vue.js, we'd like to have a native integration in ATK UI for Vue.js. So Alain will explain how he sees this and what kind of benefit it will give us. Maybe he will show us a demo of some of that. And yeah, I'd like to hear what you guys, Francesco, Philip, what you think about that. Have you used Vue.js? And yeah, maybe it's would be easier for the components.
I only had a brief look into Vue.js, but what I saw I really liked. And I thought, yeah, maybe it would be, especially for one page in my app, which is quite huge regarding the amount of data that it sends. It would be a good add-on because then I wouldn't have to send the rendered HTML, but just the data, and Vue.js would take care of the HTML rendering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll also give a little bit my reasons why. So okay, a few years, like 5 or 6 years ago, AngularJS became popular, and everyone started using AngularJS. And you build an app entirely in JavaScript. It communicates through the API with the server, and I didn't like it so much because, well, first of all, there were some issues. And the whole application is different and not necessarily better. I see how that and React.js, how applications are using that. They don't support sorting properly, so pagination is very bad because they don't want to send all the data to the client, and client still does pagination and sorting regardless of that. So it's one place where I see this often is Amazon console. You keep searching and it says no results, but then you go to the next page and there are results which should match, but they don't because it only searches for the first 50 records.
They want to surprise you and buy.
It's a really it's AWS services, so Amazon services. So it's they have lots of UI, and all of that UI is inconsistent, is quite bad. So I decided I don't want AngularJS and I don't want React.js because these are powerful frameworks and you can build the application. But Vue.js is different because Vue.js complements ATK instead of fighting with it. You can build a view, so ATK view, which has HTML, it has Vue.js template, some JavaScript, and it exposes a callback for your Vue.js functions. Yeah. So imagine you have a component where you're allowed to push buttons, sort things, like drag and drop things, and in ATK you can define callbacks for all those actions, and Vue.js can invoke those actions. So you can deploy a Vue.js component just by passing configuration to it. So it feels very native to ATK. So it's very nice, yeah, and it's not jQuery. So I think it's gonna be a good approach.
But we will use even jQuery.
For now, yeah, there is a jQuery as well.
Yeah,
So,
but you can still also use the jQuery within a Vue component if you like to.
Yeah, they can they are compatible,
Yeah.
but Vue.js doesn't require a jQuery, so it's
No,
Yes.
but you know, sometimes if you need to select, you know, an element within the HTML page, then you know you can rely on you can still rely on jQuery for that, or just pure JavaScript. It's up to you. They both work together.
So Alan, can you show us maybe some examples or give us a better, like, show some code with
Of course.
the integration?
Only a question. Vue.js, due to the open source origin of the project, because there are other framework that can be really good to be used, that are in the middle of open source and commercial license, like jQuery widgets, for example.
Yeah, and then the nice thing about Vue compared, let's say, to React or Angular is that Vue is, you know, you can create as many instances of a Vue component as you like within your HTML page. So you're not restricted within a big application, let's say like Angular does, or React. I'm not too sure because I didn't work with React that much. But
the syntax of Vue.js win over Angular and React, for my opinion. I mean, it's more nicely written.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler. I would say
Yes.
it's simpler to use, and it's also like, you know, it's two different let's say approach. Like in Vue, you can create like I said, as many instances per component that you need, so you're not stuck within a big application like Angular. Which they have
ATK.
all their pros and cons. Depends what, you know, the
in ATK you can add as many views, right? They independent.
I'm sorry?
In ATK you can add as many views as you want. You can
yeah, you can create as many
copies,
instances of a Vue application as you want. So
it has very good synergy with Vue.js.
Yeah, and this is what we do also with you know, in Sasti. So I don't know if you want me to.
Can you show? Can do present something?
Okay. Should I present my screen, right?
Yeah. So you can click on the button, present.
Okay. Sorry. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So I mean, I already start creating Vue in ATK. Right. So this is right now. This is a Vue component called Inline Edit. So basically, what it does is it creates an input from your database, for example. Like this is using country name, and you can inline edit it. Like if I hit escape, it's gonna revert back to the previous value, or if I hit enter, it's gonna save it into the database essentially. So this is just a little component that we use in SAST, and just trying to port it into ATK right now.
So what is the stuff you have on the right?
So this is the view debugger, let's say.
Okay,
so
that's
I can
an
see,
add-on, right?
No, that's a Chrome add-on for the developer tool. So when you're developing a view component, you can see their value, and this is just for developing, basically.
It's like an inspector for Vue.js specifically. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it allows you to see your components and see the data you have inside.
Okay.
But that being said, sorry, in SAST, right, this is one big component that we have is called the UI builder. I don't know if you showed that before, Ramans?
Maybe, but no, we didn't focus on that.
Okay, is it okay for me to show it?
Sure, yeah.
So technically, it allows you to create, to drop component to your page and use, move component around within your page. So for creating, let's say, tabs, you can have grids in there where you can have, different, you can add different things, and then you can customize your component, let's say.
By the way, the thing that flies out, the flyout bar, it's another Vue component.
Actually, no, this is a regular JavaScript, but
oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, so yeah, we did it. What about the search functionality on the right?
Search is this is a Vue component also.
Okay.
So this is one Vue component.
Yeah, and so what you told me before is that if you just Google, there are lots of different Vue components out there.
Yeah.
So you can always adopt something.
Yeah.
And you can use even the web components. I mean, you can create a new tag and add the functionality to that tag.
Yep.
Yeah. Regarding that demo what you showed, can you show us how does it look on the PHP side? Because I know that Vue components have some sort of template with some tags. So where does it go in ATK, and how our existing UI components are different?
So let's look at the the more simple one, the inline editing. Okay, so basically, let me show you. This is the JavaScript part of it. Oh, sorry.
Wrong project.
So hold on. Here's. So this is the JavaScript part of the inline component. So so what's nice about this is Vue is already doing a lot of binding with between the component and the action. So these are all method that you can bind directly to your component, like on focus. What happened when you blur and so on. There's two ways you can define template. You can define template using the template string here, but this one is using an HTML template, which is what we call an inline template. So basically, the ATK inline edit, that's the component name, and then you just bind your data that you're passing to the to this component, and of course, you say this one is using an inline template instead of a JavaScript template string, let's say. And this is where you bind your action within your component. So on key up, right? This is the function that is going to be that is going to run. So when you hit enter, when you get focus on the document, or when it gets blur. So this is already built in within the view component. So that's why it makes it so a lot easier to maintain your your action or event. And also the nice thing is the property that you pass are reactive. So changing those value will update the component directly. So these are all the method that were bind to this template, like on blur. This is the function that's run when user blur the on the input by itself.
Alain, there was a call to the obj.api. Is that semantic UI?
Say that again?
Inside the JavaScript code, you were sending a post request. You were using semantic UI, right?
Yeah. I'm still using semantic for because we're using it, right? So on the update function, so I'm just creating the sending the okay. API request. So all the functionality for on the API server still work, like if there's an error and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, you can still use semantic API for it.
Right. But is there some alternative in Vue.js?
I'm sorry?
Is there some alternative in Vue.js?
No, you have to build your call to the server, let's say.
Okay, so it's just easier to use this, right?
Or not for semantic, I would probably use like in a library to fetch the request and just update the with the response.
Okay.
But since we're already using semantic UI, so I'm using this instead.
Okay. All right. Can you talk about the PHP part now?
So what needs to create this, right? So this is the component are create using a view service, calling a method. So create ATK view. So you just send in the the ID of your HTML element where you want to apply the component to. This is the name of the component, and this is the data object that you pass to your component. So in the case of my inline edit, it will be a URL string for the callback that I'm using on update. It will be the initial value of the input, and it will be an ID, which is a number, which returns the model ID that goes with the value. So this is the
Why
database.
Not put that inside the URL?
I'm sorry?
Why not put ID inside the URL with a sticky get?
I just didn't want to use sticky get, but I could have done with sticky get also.
Okay.
It's just the implementation choice, let's say.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So and what the PHP side is, it's this one here. So using the default template, which is what I just showed you inline edit. Of course, there's a callback. So when you create a component, it creates the callback for saving to the server. So when you set the model, it will use either a field that you've defined before or just the title field, and then it will, on the callback, it will save it to the database, basically. And this is the action to create the view component, right? So you just send him the ID of your HTML element, the component name, and this is the data that I'm passing to that component, basically.
So, question in this, because the implementation right now, so you implemented this on top of ATK, but it doesn't really integrate into the heart of ATK. So at the bottom in the render screen, maybe we can modify view class so that it would be more straightforward initializing components. For example, instead of calling this JS, you could call this viewer, and then as a parameter you specify name of component and data, and it will set everything for you.
Yeah, and this is what it does, right? This is
So simplify this a little bit, so just you say that this view is using a view component, and that's it.
Yeah, but you need to pass those values, right?
Yeah, you're still passing those values, but as far as the creation of the view component, we could make that simpler.
Okay.
Another thing is the template of view component and the code of view component, they're not attached together, right? So you can have any template and you can have any component, and you can cross-match them as you want.
Yeah.
So technically, when you're initializing view component, the template could be defined inside your HTML, right?
Yeah, and this, and then let's say you could specify a different method here depending on how you render this template. So this will work well with the ATK template rendering engine.
Are you specifying it inside HTML or the PUG?
Sorry?
Are you writing this inside the PUG file or HTML file?
The PUG file.
Okay.
Let me show you.
Still showing the HTML. Nice. So yeah, it's good. It supports.
So this could be a template variable, let's say, right?
Yeah.
So depending on certain data, you could pass a different method to your component, basically.
Okay. Right. Right. So next question is, let's say we release a next version of ATK UI, and it has integration with Vue.js. So that means every application you use, they have some sort of include for Vue.js now.
Yeah.
How do you work
I
with
mean, it's already now. It's part of the ATK GS UI. Is that what you mean?
Because we're building that, right? So I know in our project in SAST we have a build process, so we use Gulp, which compiles multiple JavaScript files. It includes externals, installs through npm, and then it bundles them into a single component, a single JS file, minifies it, and then it's included. That's that's what we use in most projects, and we can probably do that for ATK. But if you build your own component, you have a little bit of your own JavaScript code, you need to run this compiling yourself. That's not normal practice, right?
That's why I've created in ATK. I create within the view service. I expose a method which is create view, right? So you could pass your own component to that method, and it will create that view instance for you. The same way as I'm doing it for ATK components. So
what's the
technically,
difference between create view and create ATK view?
so technically, you could, let's say, define your component. So in a JavaScript file, right?
Yeah.
Instead of exporting this, you just assign a variable to that object. That's it.
Okay.
And then you load your JavaScript file, and then you call this method within the view service.
Yeah.
And this will create the component for you. So you can build your own component and have view service create the instance for you.
I see.
So you're not limited to what we offer. You can build your own. Does that make sense? What I said?
Yeah. I think Francesco, and Philip and Imans. Hi, Imans. Have you got any questions?
Oh, hello. Yeah, this is a bit outside of my understanding. Yeah. So no questions.
So in other words, an external developer could create, his own component, right? So you just, instead of it, because now I'm using, a Webpack builder. So, but instead of exporting this, I could just create assign it to a variable name, assign this object to a variable name, and then load this file, and then just pass this as my, component name. That's it.
So, okay, I've got a good question. Let's say Imans, who doesn't understand anything about Vue.js, he wants to use external view component that's designed to work with ATK. Does he need to use gulp and compile JavaScript?
No.
So how will JavaScript code for that component be included? Because it sits inside vendor folder, right? Or I don't know from.
Well, the component object needs to be exposed to in some way, right? So you could. So if you have access to that component object, you can use this method within the view service to create it. If you don't have access to it, then you can just create your own view instance yourself.
So how about this PHP include could add another JavaScript include source inside the body, which will load the file from the GitHub CDN.
Mm-hmm.
Would that work?
Sure. If the component object is exposed in some way, so you have access to this object here, then you can create the component using view service. Mm-hmm. If not, you still can create the component yourself using this method like new view, and then you just pass you create the element name component and stuff like that.
But you will have to copy the file, right? Your JavaScript file inside the public folder.
Yeah. But the view is available, will be available. Okay. I can even expose just the view itself, the view variable, so it will be even easier. That's an idea also. Instead of exposing the method,
So how about this? Okay. Well, we talked about this invoice add-on. Maybe I'll share I'll present my screen and tell others about this invoice component.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss about how that will be implemented and how others can use. Oh, actually, guys, before that, any other questions? To Alain?
Not from my side.
Still thinking.
Yeah. I'm still wondering how in JavaScript there can be an object without either reading class or something. It's still a bit mythical to me working in JavaScript with objects. I'll get to that.
Well, it's the that's what's nice about Vue is that you just pass in an object within your this object defines how you build that component basically.
Yes, and all is encapsulated in the component. I think this is the thing that make the JavaScript a new language of programming. If not, all is permeable.
Okay. Imans, any questions from you?
Yeah. No, not really. If you don't need to compile JavaScript, then I'm happy.
Because he runs Windows.
Yeah, and it's somehow it compiles, but some features still don't work. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find this ticket. So what we're planning to do with Elaine is that there will be two-step contribution from us. The first will be a pull request inside ATK4, which introduces the native support for Vue.js. Yeah, so we'll include a sample Vue.js component, like Elaine was showing on the demo page. That's kind of step number one, but also a necessary binding, so that Vue service, which will explain and show how this all maps together. The other thing I'll show you now. I just can't find the link. Where did the link go? Okay, issue 419 inside ATK. And it's long. It's a issue which goes quite some time back, and the idea is to have like a multi-line form for the invoice, but we never got to implement that. So we want to implement something like this, but we want to implement it for invoices only, just to simplify the implementation. And we will create an add-on. It will be released under MIT, so you can use it as inspiration or fork it or modify it. The add-on will contain two models. The one model will be invoice, the other one will be line. So you have invoice like name, address, or subtotal, whatever nodes. Another invoice which will contain a line. So we have item number, item name, price, quantity, and so on. We will also include two views. The first one is simple. We will just print the invoice on the page. It will use some predefined layout, so it's kind of like a basic view, but maybe with a lister inside it, just to display the invoice nicely. But the second one will be a really, really interesting one. So we will use a view component. We'll have a custom view component which displays a form like this, and it will also be save on modify. So if you edit any field here, it will be saved. Also, it will send the data back using a view callback. You saw callbacks. It will store the data inside a database, and it will send the information back. So for example, in here I have price and quantity, and if I do change quantity, it immediately sends it to the server, reads it again, and it will send me the total value back. So the total will get updated, and also will update a subtotal in here. So we want to create like a very nice invoice editing experience built inside Vue.js, but using ATK as a backend. So that's our plan. Is that correct, Elaine?
Yeah.
Now that sounds pretty nice.
Yeah, and if you like that, you can create more add-ons like that. And also another thing which will be included in this add-on is integration part with SAST. So we're building this add-on, so it will be our SAST users can use it inside their applications, and there will be like a small portion which demonstrates how the integration takes place. Okay, so I think that's it about Vue.js and the invoices.
One question. It will send data to server after you change any of these fields, right?
Right. Yeah.
So these requests are asynchronous. Yeah. So isn't it possible to mess data or something if you change these fields very fast and it sends like 5 requests to the server and gets 5 responses in mixed order?
Well, we can debounce that. So so if user is typing very, very fast, so it will just send a request after it finished typing, basically.
Well, the idea is, we know it's invoice. So, for example, if you click Add New Line, a new line will appear, or maybe it will appear automatically as you fill out the line. So I'm not sure about the mechanics. You fill it out, right? You fill out all the fields, and then you leave. So technically, you go out from this form. You start filling out the next line, and this is a good opportunity for the Vue component to send this new data and create new line in the backend. And after that, it comes back with the information about the total. So total will not be a field. And while it's doing that, as the rule we're using in our existing forms is that when the request happening, it will disable all the fields, so that exactly for this reason. So you can't mess up that individual line. But you can, if connection is slow, you can add 3-4 lines very, very quickly, and it will keep saving them. So it will take time to save each line. It shouldn't be a problem, I think.
Yeah, but you will need some kind of how it's called, not line. So all these requests go in different predefined order to the server, and send next request only when you get response.
I don't think it's important.
Well, I actually have some of this autosave running for a year now. I didn't have any problem with it so far, actually.
Yeah.
Even if sending lots of requests. Well, the server is fast, luckily, but so far I didn't find anything that messes up.
When you start put remote connection and bad connection, I have a problem with one of my client about what is saying Imans, and I still try to solve the issue for bad connection or slow connection, because the principle is the same. I mean, I change the quantity, the price of a single photo, and in a grid with 100 and something will change all the data. The grid will refresh and we get back some data back and recalculate all the totals. And this is the functionality requested, and I going mad about this. And this can be.
There are gonna be no refreshes here, right? Because the way we operate is that the Vue.js component will load, and it will communicate with the backend using like a mini API. So the callback, it sends the data to the callback. Callback responds with JSON. It takes the JSON, it updates the values, and the values will automatically appear in the fields, because what Alain said about the binding, the binding values. So it's kind of just going to be working probably much better. Also, you have a better control about the failure. So if you're unable to save the line, you can just delete that line. display error and the line
And
disappears.
we can encapsulate each request within a promise also, and and act on the return value if it's an error or not. So you can revert the value on the within the component, or update it if it's successful.
Is that me, or Alain sounds weird?
No, I think it's just you.
I always
I think it's me.
weird.
I'll have to reconnect.
I had my microphone switched off and was talking for like 15 seconds. Yeah. So regarding UI, what I did to display, but you can still keep on working with it. And so far, this works, at least for my applications, works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's much better than just disable all fields, because it will flicker this form all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
Exactly.
One thing clearly about the invoice, it can be I change the quantity of an item, and on the server will be checked if the quantity is available, and we give back an error if the quantity is not available. Probably is not so straightforward. I mean,
on server side, it could be some kind of validation on
yes.
data model level, but the question is how it will present it to the user.
Yes.
Well, for example, like using a toast. I really like those toasts, actually. So they give the user a clear message, yet don't block the whole screen.
Yeah, toast, and then you can revert the value, to what it was, or act on the on that error method.
Okay, guys, I'm back. I had some audio problems, but now it's okay.
Yeah, it just sounded as if you were playing drums.
Yeah, you sounded like that as well. was weird. Right. So, should we move on to contains?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? By the way, Romans, did you see what I did there?
See what you did there.
You better do. Okay.
What did you do?
Refactored some other classes too. Added namespaces.
Oh God.
And so it's for if it will be major version, then we have to do this.
So okay. So first of all, we have a celebration because this is a pull request 400.
Yeah.
It's a big anniversary. No one cares about 399 anymore, but 400. So the idea is to implement contains one and contains many, and we had a debate here with DarkSide, and we couldn't decide. Well, we couldn't decide because Iman's we disagree on persistences. There was a backslash now. All right. So the concept is, yeah. So let me show you.
Oh, it will be hard to find. Can you somehow?
Yeah, I'll show the wiki. Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
What was Oh, it's not the wiki. How did I get there? Okay. So yeah, that's what we discussed before, and the idea is that we have this inside database. For example, we have persistence where we have John's name, but his order is an array, and array consists of data for a separate model, and that separate model is not stored inside the database as normal, but instead it's getting coded into JSON and gets stored inside the field. So first of all, we looked into a different way, different ways how SQL databases operate with JSON, and it's complete zoo there because everyone does things differently. And we said, okay, we're just going to store JSON as string for now, and that's the concept of serialization. So if you have serialize field on which is set to JSON, then the persistence is required to take the array or whatever, or object or whatever the value of that field is, encode it into string using JSON encoding, and then store it as a string. So that means it doesn't use a native support for JSON. But if you remove the JSON encoding, then it is supposed to do it natively, and that's not supported right now. So we're only using serialized values. Next thing, okay, let's see what is here. Should we look at your test cases? Oh yeah, so about the persistence. So I had this concept, right? It was the way how I was thinking. If you look at the model, it has an array called data, and it has a get and set values, and also there is persistence. So whenever I'm setting something inside the model, it does a normalization. For example, if I have a Boolean field and I do set 1, it will convert 1 into a Boolean value, which is a true and false, and it will store that inside the data array, right? When I'm saving that into the database, the persistence will take stuff out of this array, and it will store it inside the database. And when it's doing that, it might convert the values again into something else. We also have array persistence. And the idea of array persistence is when you're saving into array persistence, it converts everything that's inside your data array into an array. But to be honest, there's nothing, it's not doing much. I think it's just copying data, right? Does it do anything else, Siemens?
I didn't follow. Basically, if you have, for example, datetime field in array, then persistence will save it as object in that array. But we have to save it as string. So we need to typecast.
Well, array doesn't specify how it should be stored, or does it? Okay, so if we have datetime object, the data array contains the value as an object of datetime, right?
Yes.
But if you associate it with the array persistence, and if you save into that array persistence, what will be inside that array?
Still datetime object, datetime array, just serialized with JSON. That's how array persistence does, but
Sure.
this contains one, contains many, will add additional typecasting to convert it to the string. So it should go. So it's probably not in array persistence.
I don't think it is, yeah. Because the only idea of array persistence is that it copies into an external array such as session.
Yeah, but it will copy it as it is. If it will have element which is object.
Yeah, as it is. And then if you put the data object inside session and you save session, it is these objects, they are capable of serializing themselves. So there is a support. What was it, like sleep or
yeah.
There are some methods for an object you can define in PHP, and it explains how it's by default. But it's not JSON either case, yeah. So it will store itself somehow, but it's not JSON, and then it will reappear as an object when you load it. So we're kind of fine with that, yeah. But if you want to convert it into JSON, that it might be a little bit trickier because it's array persistence, it's not JSON persistence. Array can contain objects, but JSON cannot. So when it comes to using contains many, the concept is that you have two models, and my idea is that one model can share or link, like reference, a portion of another model's data, because data is a property which is model specific. The parent model could have. Okay, let me open some code here to illustrate. Do I have ATOM? I don't have ATOM, or that's weird. All right. Okay, let me go just to the bottom here and type some code. Right. So let's say I have order, which is new object. Sorry, a new order with a persistence of SQL persistence, right? And then I have another order address, which is let's say order address, and we want to say that this order address. Here's how we can hack it around: order address data equals order data address. We do that, and we do assignment by reference. So now what happens if inside order address, I set a value, for example, line 1 equals ABC. It will store inside the data of order address, but because they're linked, it will also update the data of the original of the order as well. So now I could just do order save, and this will be saved inside SQL persistence. And to me it seems that you're going to be storing inside data anyway, right? So whether it's here or here, it doesn't make a lot of difference. That's kind of my approach. Iman's approach is slightly different because he wants to use an new array persistence here, and the array persistence will be using order. Is it using order data? The rest like this?
Yeah.
Roughly speaking, right? So, and then this way, these are independent arrays now. So I need to do order address save, and when I call that, it will copy the data. Oh, so that's not needed. It will copy the data of order address inside order. Maybe it will encode it a little bit, and then saving order address will also be needed. So you have to save one, and you have to save another.
Yes.
So that's the fundamental difference in the way how we see the containment.
And I can try to explain why my approach is better.
Go on. Okay.
Because of normalization, serialization. If you simply link these data arrays together with reference, no normalization will happen, no serialization. All these things, no before, after, save hooks for order address, and all that stuff. That's why I think this way is better.
Why do you say the serialization will not happen? You mean if inside order address I have a order?
Sorry, not serialization, typecasting.
Okay, let's say order address. I do add field, and in here I say I want to have name, data.
Yeah. Better
and then I do serialize.
No, not serialization.
No, just let me finish here. JSON. If that's the case, essentially I'm saying that I want to do order address data, and I want to assign, whatever I want, like A is B. But when I will be saving order address, it will convert into JSON, and inside the order, that field will be inside the string. Because we're serializing when we're moving stuff into persistence. So even though the persistence is an array, it will need to serialize this array, the data.
Yes.
But in my case, when it's linked without the persistence, it will not do the serialization. And similar happens if we have date, right? So if there is a date at field, although I don't know how we don't serialize date, right?
Just to type date, and it will be datetime object.
Right. Okay. So inside the ordered address data, it will be datetime object. But when I do save, at this point, it will do the serialization. So it will do the typecasting. It's called typecasting, right? So typecasting save of data object in order to pack it into order data array. In order to pack it here. So it might not be object anymore.
Yes, but if we go do like in your approach, then it will not. It will try to serialize address array with JSON, and inside will be datetime object serial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then there is another thing, right? So let's say I do order address add field, and in here I'm using some unusual type. Yeah. So let's say, for example, I do new field money and currency. So maybe I'm using a field which contains both money and currency. Yeah. Maybe yeah. Something like that. And if I'm saving that, this field will be smart enough to serialize itself into something meaningful. But if we don't use the array persistence like this, the serialization will not be done. Well, in fact, you don't even need to save anything, but it will not serialize correctly. So now I see why the serialization is like why the array is important here. Because order will not care about that. Order treats the whole value of that field as an array, and it will just encode it. That's it. So we might run into the situation where that will give us problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Then you'll need some custom JSON encoding method who will recursively somehow work, but still it will not know anything about these fields of sub model.
Anyway, that's yeah. No, Philip, I wanted to ask your opinion on this.
Well, it's too bad I have been off screen for when you presented your approach, Romans. I only saw Eamon's approach. Sorry.
No problem. So,
about contains many, I will.
Let's talk about references. Yeah? So first of all, what is reference? We already have references. We have reference has one, reference has many. Reference is an object which represents a link between two models, and it allows you to jump from one to another. So essentially, it implements method ref, which will create an instance of a new model. It will set persistence of this new model, and it will return it to you. And in this case, we're implementing two new references. One reference contains many, another reference contains one. And in this case, we don't have to add a lot inside the model because it already uses has one and has many references, which has all the logic there, and contains many has all the logic inside these methods here. So technically, we can implement another reference, yeah, which is a different implementation of has1. And like me and Niemans we discussed, we could have contains MTM. Right? Contains MTM would be contains many-to-many relationship. So in a way, it would be something like a list of ID fields for another model, but maybe that will be later. So
Yeah.
no, not yet. Contains one reference. It's modeled similar to has1 reference. So there is a type in here. There's serialization. Why do we have serialization? Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah, you can use different serialization theoretically.
yes. But the point here is that it also adds field. So the field is also in there, which I'm actually not so thrilled about. I'm not sure if we need field for contains one. Has1 has a field. It's a dropdown. For contains one, this doesn't make sense.
But it has to be somehow saved.
Yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
I need it as a
So
field.
that's a system field, right? So system. Yeah, that's a system field. I see now.
But the bad thing is that if you have big value there, then it will always load system fields and could become slow.
Yeah, but we do need it, right? Anyway.
We do need it.
Because we might reference into it and... okay.
Yeah. This way it's also the same way, working the same way as has1. Has1 does create a field, contains one, makes it
but also shows
easier
on the
to
form
understand.
and you have a drop-down.
Yes, of course, has1 shows on the form. Actually, it has a lookup since ATK UI 1.6.2, I think.
But contains one will not have a drop-down.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's look at the test. So we have what country, VAT rate, invoice.
Yeah.
So VAT rate, why VAT rate only name? No, we shouldn't have a rate in there.
Yeah, but basically invoice lines and address.
Okay, so in invoice we have has1, and it contains a shipping address, and that's how we define it. We say shipping address and address class, and also contains many lines. So these are invoice lines. Uses the line class. We have we don't have these classes here. So there it is. Okay, address class in here, and there's a line in here. Price, quantity, no formulas. So
No, it's for simple tests.
No contains test, right? So we initialize these three tables. You were asking for me. So can inside the line can we reference a VAT rate ID?
Yeah, but it doesn't work for now.
Doesn't work, yeah. So, but it makes sense, right? So if we have a model for a line, even though this model will be initialized correctly, the problem here is that I think the way I saw the problem, the line class will be initialized using the array persistence. So line comes from an array. When you do has1 inherits the same persistence as a line. So if you traverse inside VAT rate ID, it will try to load it from the same array, but that array doesn't have VAT rate ID. VAT rate ID is in database. So in a way, we have to instruct this model that if you do use has1, it should, instead of using the array persistence, you should fall back to the SQL persistence.
But also maybe not always. So you can write here not the VAT rate class, but create a VAT rate object and pass persistence there.
Directly into that, yeah.
Yeah. But the problem is that at this point you don't know anything about your SQL persistence.
Well, actually, if you so when you initializing, because you do initialize this model inside the reference, right? Where is the reference? Reference is 1. Okay, so that's the way how you initialize. You say get model. So M will be model, and you okay persistence and persistence data use this. And where do you link the model with persistence?
Which persistence? Array persistence?
Yes.
In get model. No. Wait a second.
Contains 1.
Yeah, contains 1 get model.
You refactored it.
Yeah.
There contains 1. All right. So when we're traversing, so we're calling graph, it executes get model and pass some information there.
Oh, it's a bit on top. Scroll up. Get default persistence. Well, this one.
Right. Anyway, so here's my question. So when we initialize this model, when exactly init method is going to be called for that new the invoice line model? So no, that's the contained model. So here we call get model.
Get model is from a reference class.
Okay, and then it will execute get default persistence and it will associate with it, right? There's a model.
Yeah,
So the
if model will already have persistence, then it will use that persistence. If not, then call this method to get default persistence.
You're not actually using that. So maybe inside the model we can have another property. So right now we have a property called persistence, which will be set to array, but maybe we can hack around, and even though it's have a secondary persistence. So the primary will be array, but secondary will be SQL. So if you use ref, it will use a secondary persistence. Just going back to SQL.
That doesn't sound good.
Because now the way how this is not working is actually not logical. Because this should work.
But why it should? It doesn't know if I want to use array persistence or what persistence. I need a way how to pass persistence into has1.
Yeah, but from the perspective of user, yeah. For example, Philip, okay, he doesn't know anything about array persistences, right? He just wants to have invoice that contains line, and define that line references VAT rate. That's it. Okay? So he doesn't specify persistence at any point in time. So
yeah, but
he will wonder now why suddenly I'm using array persistence. It's an implementation detail.
But VAT rate class doesn't know that it should use SQL persistence, for example.
No, it doesn't. So the logic should be inside has1.
But has1. How
so
it will?
In a way, we need has1 or the model should be capable of switching maintaining multiple persistences. So while working all the time, we're working with SQL. So it happens that one model is actually an array, but if you traverse out of that, it should go back to SQL. For example, maybe we can create a different array persistence. No, let's see. Extending array persistence.
And what if? Oh, no.
I think we need to solve it somehow, because
Yeah,
that would be really confusing if.
but I don't like that idea about secondary persistence. What if there will be third and fourth persistence?
Well, I mean, okay. Let's say you have an array persistence, but array persistence links to a previous persistence. Yeah, so it links to a SQL persistence, or you could say, when you're doing ref outside of array persistence, it will fall back to this previous one.
Maybe I need some way how to tell that what rate object should use same persistence as invoice object. I don't know if it's SQL or
In here, in here.
Same as another.
Okay. Well, we'll have to solve it. Until this is solved, I think this must work. Until we find a way how to solve this, we can't pass this pull request.
Okay.
Just needs to work.
Okay.
And yeah, by the way, guys, if you're thinking about has many here, like me and Nimas, we discussed it, it doesn't work, right? We can't have has many at this point. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But it is logical to have some freezed values and a link to the database where there can be no freezed values. I don't know if you understand what I want to say.
What do you mean freezed?
I see only this use case. I made an invoice. I used the defined VAT price and quantity at that moment, and I freeze these values in a JSON
inside array.
In place of define a table linked with IDs, and it's really good this. But insert in this beautiful portrait an as one or an as many. I don't know what can be the functionality of this. The mixing of static values or historical values and dynamic values from the database.
Well, but the ID values don't change in database, so it's kind of safe unless you delete some rate. Then it's bad. Then it's.
But if you modify it, I will change all the totals of the invoice.
Imans, here's a suggestion. Yeah. What if we inside the model class we add a new property, so we have persistence inside the model. We add another property which is contains inside, and contains inside will point to a model which contains this. So when you initialize line, it will set the value of contains inside. It will be point to the invoice, and then if you add another contains, so if you do it like hierarchically once again, it will still copy that contains in value as far as necessary. And if you do ref has one, if you do this from inside the model, it will check if the contains inside is set. It will use persistence of that model instead of our own persistence.
Yeah, it's like parent model, but grand.
Yeah. And also it makes sense. Yeah, inside the line we could actually check this property. Is this a line which is stored inside the table and whatever, or is it contained inside another model?
Yeah,
sounds very sensible.
Yeah.
And by the way, for the line you don't have to define table because it's contained. Probably you could, but it wouldn't change it.
You can. It will not throw.
Yeah, there is actually another thing which we talked about with Imans. And it is about the actual value that has one stores. My idea was, going back to the, let's say I have list of orders, list of invoices. Yes, that's sorry, invoices. Yeah, so invoice is stored as like invoice number 1. You have something here, and inside here you have ref, which is ABC, and you have lines, which is array containing objects like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works for has many, yeah. So has many lines. So contains many lines. Now, if instead of that we want to define, so we have invoice, and we want to define invoice address, right? And invoice address has 1. So one of the ideas was that it will be array of a single object. So we have like 1, and here we would have name or address of street, high street. Okay, and when even though it has 1, it still contains array of array, right, like this. While I was suggesting that it should contain a structure like this. So contains 1, it should have an array or a hash. Yeah, so street at this level. What Iman said in defense of his approach is that what if in the future I want to convert contains 1 into contains many? If we do store it inside array of array, it will be compatible. Yeah. So okay, instead of multiple ones, you have 1, so you can switch them back and forth. My argument was that storing it like this would be binary compatible with a lot of JSON APIs, and also it looks more nicer. It looks more proper.
Mm-hmm.
Imans, do you still insist on your approach?
Not really, and I'm not sure now, but I think I changed it to your approach.
And yeah, the reason why this is better, because since we're using arrays anyway, array persistence requires you to have this, right? So even if you have 1 element inside array persistence, you still need to have an array of objects in there.
Well, let me check. I think if I go with your version. It's on. So many changes. Yeah, here it is, and it says row, and row is row. Yeah. It's your version.
You changed it, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Does it
well,
make sense for everyone else?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
I think of, as I'm working with API at the moment, I'm thinking about that approach. If I send a request to an API, and let's say invoice model, it has only 1 address. So do I expect array which is 1, I'm lacking the English expression, which has only 1 dimension, or do I expect an array which has 2 dimensions? Well, if it's
that's a good way to.
If there's only 1 object anyway, of course I expect a 1-dimensional array, not a 2-dimensional, because it doesn't make sense if it only has 1.
Okay.
Yeah, it will be 1-dimensional now.
Yeah, it is. I just think it's more natural.
Yeah.
Okay, Imans, one other thing. Did you have a test for recursive? So something contains many and then contains many once again?
No. But I have one question for you. Can you scroll a bit up one screen? Yeah, stop. About contains many. Currently, it will store ID value also.
Okay.
And basically, it's useless, but I need it to be able to the words there.
Well, this idea is because of RI persistence, right? RI persistence creates this field. If we don't want this ID, we should do something about RI persistence and make it not store this ID.
Yeah, I can remove that ID, but then I can't load rows, for example.
It becomes troublesome if you would like to put CRUD on it, because CRUD expects have IDs.
Yeah, you see this example.
I think it's fine, but more importantly is that you are able to read it even if there is no ID in there. And so if you have a persistence where you have rows and it doesn't have this, it will still load fine.
Not sure.
No, I know that. Yeah. So it's
okay.
if it's not stored and you would like to display it as a table, it will be just fine.
Yeah, but if I save it,
if I save it, will add. Yeah, it adds it back. I mean, probably the correct solution. The correct solution here is if we, for the model, we can define that this model doesn't have ID. You can.
I did that for contains one, but in this case I can't do that.
Okay. All right.
Okay, recursive tests. I will write it down to remember.
What about the rest of your test scripts? Are they?
These at the end was for has one.
So okay, I wanted to. Any more questions about the pull request? Yes. No.
Is there now datetime objects just stay stored as datetime objects, right?
Oh yeah, we need a test for the data.
It's there.
Oh, you made it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I didn't add the test for money and other fields, but the data is there, so
yeah,
others should work too.
Philip, what was the question again? Sorry.
We were discussing, does date get typecasted to a string, or will it just be stored as object? At the moment, it's stored as object, right?
No, as a string.
But the string, is it just a serialized object or a string representation of the date?
String representation of the date. It does additional typecasting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's one thing I'd like to get to later. It's regarding API, but yeah, it's good to know this code already exists somewhere, But let's finish this topic first. I just wanted to know.
Yeah, but I think it's a responsibility of array persistence. So when you're storing something inside array persistence, we have to ask we know that array persistence stores in a key value fashion, but what could be the value in here? Right? Because another really interesting point is, when we're using audit, and when something changed, we want to store previous values and the new values of all the fields. And the way how it's done, it stores it inside array persistence, and then it goes into the JSON. So again, we had this issue when we start using date. It was just trying to display the dates inside JSON. It was like messed up. So probably array persistence should convert date into something, but the question is how do we define the way how it stores, and that's actually probably the same how date is stored in SQL. Like in SQL, we do convert it into a different format, and you can define the format for that. You can change the format of the date. And probably the same can be done with the array as well. But that's separate. Yeah, that's have nothing to do with contains.
Yeah, separate topic.
Yeah. And also we're getting namespaces for persistences, which I am really happy about. Maybe not as a part of this pull request, but instead of using persistence _array, it's now persistence \array. But that's backward compatible, right?
No. Basically.
It should be backward compatible. Like,
Okay, and I can create some proxy classes.
yeah. Otherwise, you have this. Okay, here, persistent static, and it will fail. You just need to create a proxy class. Otherwise, you're gonna be like a Python guys.
No, or use.
Sorry, my audio is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope it still records. All right. Okay. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I mean, we talked about Vue.js and we talked about the invoice implementation. What is the invoice thing? So the invoice contains a header and the lines. So when we're storing the invoice, it might be a good test case to also test contains many, because invoice contains many lines, and we have this UI widget which can now do that using Vue.js. Will it actually work with contains many lines? That's a good test. But also, I know when I was looking at this add-on, I asked myself, what happens when we create a new invoice? And because this always has been a problem. You create a new invoice, and you need to define lines for this invoice, but you can't save it until user clicks save button, because what if he changed his mind? So how do we associate the lines with invoice without actually saving them? And there are various workarounds for that. So you can create invoice in a status draft, and then you modify it, and then maybe at some point you delete all the draft invoices. But I think the best solution is if you store invoice inside session persistence while you're editing it. And then when you click save, it copies the data from the session persistence into SQL. And this is where the deep copy comes in, right? So we have a new feature which allows us to copy the model and related entities. So if it's not contains many, if in fact it's two separate models, and we're creating a new invoice, we can show this invoice widget using the array persistence, or actually session persistence. So while user fills it out, all the data gets stored into session. And if user clicks refresh at some point, he just goes back to that same invoice. It's not saved, but it's not lost, which is really cool feature. I mean, GitHub does that for new tickets. Sometimes it doesn't work for some reason, and it just gets lost. You type it, and then you close the window, the tab accidentally, it gets lost. So that's kind of sad. In any case, now I started thinking about when you edit something, it makes sense that you copy data into array persistence, or like a session associated with that particular page, and then you when you click save button, it copies it back from session into SQL, except for the cases when someone modified it. And if that happens, you can alert user saying, oh, hey, no, someone modified the SQL process. Do you want to override their changes? Which, again, gives you more control about the whole process. So if you have a bunch of related items, I mean, you want to update them individually as well, so you don't want to override them. In which case, when you copy data from SQL persistence into array persistence, you need to make sure that IDs are preserved. Yeah, so if you add something new, it will come with a new ID, but otherwise it should retain the same ID. It's an interesting topic, and I think that could be so. Once those two features are implemented, we can start thinking about editing complex multi-record entities and saving them. But there are still a lot of things to discuss and a lot of problems to solve.
Well, that's what we're here for, aren't we?
yeah. It's interesting, and we haven't actually talked about having a form which allows you to edit form and contained model as well. So the model and contained models at the same time, which for me makes a lot of sense. So what if you have address and then you have all the other fields like an invoice, and you want to save that? It needs to save address inside the contained model and needs to save all the fields inside the invoice model. That's another thing. But
yeah, that would be really. Pardon, sorry, I interrupted you.
It's okay. Yeah, but that's not as complex. So we could store that if we have that property for the model, which indicates that the model is contained inside another model. Then we can change the order of how we actually saving those. So yeah.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool if that was native ATK. I had some cheap implementation of this. User has many email addresses, user has many phone numbers, user can have many addresses. Mm-hmm. So I implemented something like that, but my code isn't very good. And it works, but it's not nice code, and would be great if that would be native ATK, that feature.
Right. Yeah. True. Okay. So I don't have anything else for today. Oh, we spent quite some time, I think.
Yeah, it's quite late already.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for coming. Alain, thanks you for coming.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you next week.
Could I maybe ask something which shouldn't take longer than 2 minutes?
I'm going to stop the recording and then.